Historically, Canada has given shelter to refugees from all corners of the globe. Joining us now are three who arrived in Canada before Stephen Harper became Prime Minister. Sorpong Pyo, who arrived from Cambodia via Thailand in 1982. In Bahrain via Skype, Hodan Ali, who arrived from Somalia via the U.S. in 1989. And Robi Botos, who arrived from Hungary in 1998. Their stories are documented in a new book called Flight and Freedom, Stories of Escape to Canada. Ratna Omidvar is co-author of the book, and she joins us now as well. And we're delighted to welcome all of you, both here and halfway around the world, to TVO tonight. It's great to see you all. I'm going to start by just reading an excerpt from the book that will start our discussion here. Sheldon, if you would, let's bring this up. In Canadian and international law, a refugee is someone who is outside their home country and is unable or unwilling to return to their country because they fear persecution. There must also be a motive for the persecution related to a person's race, religion, nationality, political opinion, or membership in a particular social group, which could include their gender, family identity, or sexual orientation. Let us go through all three of your examples and find out how you fit into those categories. Sorpong, I have read your story. I cannot believe you're alive. You have had just an incredibly tragic, difficult life. And yet here you are, chairing a department at Ryerson University, for goodness sakes. What a success story you are. Can you tell me how you fit into the definition of a refugee when you came to Canada?
Well, I lived under the Khmer Rouge regime, the killing fields that lasted until the Vietnamese invasion in late 1978. And after that, I didn't want to leave Cambodia. I thought that, I never thought in a million years that I would come to Canada or anywhere else outside Cambodia. But until the chief of my village came to see me and said, you have to go, because the Vietnamese were just about to arrest you because they think that you are a spy. And I had no knowledge of that. I had no idea. All I wanted to do is to stay alive and lead a new life after the Khmer Rouge reign of terror.
Interestingly enough, you are a very handsome man, I have to say. But they thought you were a cute kid, right? And that's why they spared your life.
Well, during the Khmer Rouge regime, I have 6 siblings. And basically we were spared because the chief, the Khmer Rouge chief in our district, like all of us, because we were good looking. But we were spared for that reason, I would think. But at the same time, we learned after that we were on the list to be executed in a week time, just so the Vietnamese came on time. And but even after that, we didn't know, we didn't want to leave until I was told to leave, and I left alone, leaving my mother and 6 siblings behind. Because the target was me, not my whole family anymore.
We will fill in more of the blanks throughout our discussion. Yeah. Okay, Robbie, tell us about why you considered yourself a refugee back when it came time to leave Hungary.
Well, right-wing was on the rise. A lot of neo-Nazi movement started, freedom of speech. I think I started to see a lot of people gathering together and talk about how Romani gypsies are ruining Hungary and Jews stealing Hungary. And basically, I didn't want to raise my kids in a place like that, and I wanted to be at a place where I can be who I am without any problems and fear.
We should say welcome back to this studio. You were here, I think it's probably 15 years ago, right? On the old show Studio 2.
Yes, it has to be about 15 years ago.
As a musician?
Yes. And I still play music. That's what I do, simply.
Why did you choose Canada?
I chose Canada because I already knew people who came here from Hungary, and they were raving about Canada, and I did my research, and I just always wanted to be at a place where people can be in peace, and it doesn't matter where you come from. And I remember getting on a bus here, and I looked around and said, I can see a different country in every seat. That's how I imagine heaven too. So I'm in the right place.
So you think it was a good decision to come here?
Yes, it was.
Very good. I want to bring Hodan into this now, halfway around the world. Hodan, could you go through a bit of your life story and tell us why you were a refugee when you decided to try to come to Canada from Somalia in 1989?
Well, I left Somalia as a child with my family, who at the time had faced political persecution by the former regime by Siad Barre. And then when we came to the United States, right after that, the government was toppled and followed by the civil war that's ensued for the last 23, 24 years. That's needless to say, we had nowhere to go back to, that being in Somalia. So my family and I decided, well, much of it was decided for me at the time as I was a child. We came to Canada and sought refuge, and primarily fit right in that definition of what a refugee is, fleeing persecution based on either political views, ethnicity, race, and all the other adjectives that follow that.
And let me follow up with this, because you know, of course, the United States, I don't have to tell you, is considered a great magnet for refugees and immigrants from all around the world. Lots of people want to go to the United States. You were there, and yet you ended up in Canada. How come?
I think my family, looking back at the time, considered Canada to be a bit more welcoming to refugees and immigrants in particular. My aunt, prior to that, had studied in Canada. She got her medical degree in Saskatchewan, so she had a bit of familiarity in that sense. And I think, just looking at the landscape in the U.S. compared to Canada, Canada seemed more hospitable and much more assistive of refugees, and that's why we chose Canada.
Ratna, let me bring you in at this point. In the introduction to the book, Flight and Freedom, it says that refugees are vigorous, ambitious, they desire a better society, they are prepared to work for it. What do you think it is about the refugee experience that brings out those qualities in people?
I think when you just look around this panel, the one quality that speaks out and shouts loudly is resilience. It's hard to imagine that someone who's gone through Sorpong's experience or Robi's experience or Hodan's experience is actually able to do what they have done. And yet, there are thousands of refugees who have come over the years. Our book goes back to the Underground Railroad and talks about that the impulse to stay alive, to survive, is a very human impulse. And then right after that impulse is the impulse to thrive. So I think when you put those two together, you have these wonderful stories of resilience, of recovery and repair. I do want to make that point. There's a lot of trauma in refugee lives of different degrees, and it takes them time. It takes them maybe longer than, let's say, the immigrant. But over time, it's this combination of the will to survive, thrive, and their incredible love and loyalty for this country.
Because this country gave them a break. Tell me this, you use a very interesting choice of word in part of the book. You say that the stories in the book will, quote unquote, defrost Canadians' maybe pejorative views of the refugee situation. Why do you think we need some defrosting in this country?
Well, I wrote the book 2 years ago. I didn't know what was going to happen last month. The compassion of Canadians has been defrosted significantly since that sad little picture of Alan Kurdi was shown. But if you go back since 1990, there has been a steady encroachment in our welcome of refugees. And these are small incremental changes, some bigger, and they all add up to a less welcoming society. Let's just look at numbers. In 1990, let's go back to 1990, 40,000 plus refugees. In 2014, 23,000 plus refugees. You look at that, and has been a steady decline since 1993.
Okay, Ratna, let me follow up with a question about services. You know, there are a lot of Canadians who feel that we don't have enough money right now to take care of the services for people who have lived here for generations, let alone people who are just off a boat, just off a plane, just off a train, whatever. What would you say to those who say, we got to stick to our knitting for those who've lived here for a while, and we don't have money to pay to send refugees' kids to school, money to pay for the healthcare services that refugees need, money for housing, et cetera, et cetera?
Well, I would say that our knitting is made up of refugee and immigrant success and narrative. So we are a country that is still in the nation-building stage. And yes, things are very different from, let's use Prime Minister Stephen Harper's words of old stock Canadians versus new stock Canadians. Our premise in Canada is you help people start their lives, and then they will succeed. So we have a foundational support, which has been incredibly helpful in getting people on the road to repair, recovery, and success over time. If you pull that rug from under their feet, that narrative of success will be severely hampered. So it's on our own self-interest, I would say.
I hear you. I can't help but note you just used the expression old stock Canadians, and the Prime Minister got into a lot of trouble the other day for using that. Is it okay to use that expression?
I am using the Prime Minister's terminology. I think it goes back to some of the language that is now used to separate people. So let's just look at refugees. The language that is applied to refugees is, they're queue jumpers, they're criminals, they're terrorists. So there is this language that we hope to correct through telling the stories of people who have, I think are incredibly important, have made contributions to our country.
Okay, let me pick up on the services angle, and I'm going to go back to Hodan for that. The changes that have been made in the past decade, Hodan, to access to health care for refugees, what can you tell us about those changes?
Well, in 2012, the Conservative government decided that refugees were getting quote-unquote deluxe health care and decided to strip all of health care to refugees, including the government-assisted refugees, refugee claimants. Then they later went back and restored the health coverage for the government-assisted refugees, but then the refugee claimants still face a whole lot of barriers to receiving any health care. They lost coverage for medication, they lost coverage for vision. We were not able to provide full adequate care for children with asthma and diabetes, pregnant women who've had hypertension, just because they happen to come to our shores and claim refugee status. As contrary to what the Prime Minister has said recently, saying that the only people who don't get health coverage are those, quote unquote, again, bogus and illegal refugees. That is far from the truth. Almost everyone claiming refugee status has no coverage until they go through the refugee process, and then they either get a stay or they get a leave. There's also the designation of designated countries of origin, which targets certain communities like the Roma community, who have seen dramatic increase in discrimination in Canada, and basically are considered null and bogus in their claims, therefore facing further barriers. So in terms of refugee healthcare, it has been drastically reduced. Last year, healthcare providers have challenged the government, and the federal court has ruled that the cuts were unconstitutional and that they were detrimental to the long-term health care of refugees, and that they are cruel and unusual treatments imposed on a group of people that already have faced traumatic tragedies, as we can see on our TV screens in the past month or so, and even before that. So just like all the other services, refugee healthcare has suffered dramatically under the current government. And we're hoping that in their appeal they would lose, and that this the cuts will be reversed. As of right now, the government has not fully complied the federal court's decision to completely restore care for refugees across the board. And as we're probably going to be talking about the refugee crisis currently, privately sponsored refugees will also face the same barriers, meaning that when they come to Canada, they will not be able to access care, regardless of the trauma and the medical care that they will be needing once they arrive in our country.
Okay, I want to circle back to something Ratna said a moment ago. There are all sorts of reasons, as you suggested, for people to be suspicious, or you hear these reasons for people to be suspicious of refugees. One of them are the security concerns, and we have heard it articulated during this election campaign that we have to be careful about the refugees who are coming from Syria, because who knows if ISIS fighters have infiltrated these groups of refugees and so on. This is something we talked about at this very table not too long ago with the Monk School's founding director, Janice Stein. So let's roll that clip and then we'll come back and chat. Let's roll it, please, Sheldon.
There was a real fear that Hungarian refugees would embed in them communist spies. There were issues with the Vietnamese boat people. There were security issues around that. We just forget those discussions. There have always been security fears, but governments rose above it
and managed
it.
How often do those fears end up coming true?
We have to face the fact that we may make a mistake. I think that's honest with the Canadian public, that a mistake may occur, and if that mistake occurs, that does not invalidate both the obligation and the desire of the Canadian public to run the risk of that mistake in order to take another 50,000 people who will become productive citizens in this country and enrich the country.
Janice Stein from earlier this month. Okay, Sorpong, as Janice suggests, this is nothing new. We've been hearing about these concerns for 60 years. How much risk do you think the Canadian public are prepared to accept when new refugees come to our shores?
Well, from my perspective, the security concerns are always legitimate. The question is, how far are we going to worry about this, right? I would make the case that humanitarian concerns should take precedence over security concern. And I leave it up to intelligence people to talk about security challenges. Although I have to say that from my perspective, during the Cold War, the Cold War between communism and capitalism, that was a global kind of conflict, and that motivated a lot of Western countries in the struggle for, in this war, to take in more refugees. The security concerns were there, but right now, I also have to say that it's quite different from the Cold War, and these are real people, and we need to really, from my perspective, I think we need to be less argumentative about this, but more understanding, less critical, but more compassionate, and less judgmental, but more merciful. And I feel that as human beings, mercy prevails upon other things. That doesn't mean that we should be careless. We should be very careful. Background check, if possible, is one way to go. But at the same time, people are human, and it's real life. And I would say that we need to keep the door open to people who are fleeing for their lives. This is, for me, having experienced direct physical violence and witnessed it myself, that is nothing else that matters more. When people are fleeing for their lives, it's important to keep the door open, and we have the responsibility. Of course, the international community agrees on the responsibility to protect for some reason, but that also includes the responsibility to offer refuge.
Ratna, follow-up?
I just wanted to make the case about the story of Sorpong. I looked at his story again, and I asked myself the question, would he get in today?
What do you answer?
And I would say Sarpong would have a very slim chance because at the time he came in, he was a young man of fighting age, and he was in fact forced to fight.
Yes, you joined a paramilitary outfit to fight the government that had taken over your country.
For a few months.
For a few months, okay.
So he would automatically raise all kinds of security concerns. I'll tell you a chapter from my own story, although it's not about me. We were refused entry into Canada because my husband, who's an Iranian, had to, as every other Iranian young man, perform 2 years of military service. And just that flag, even 30 years ago, was enough to say no.
This was in
1981.
81. So it's after the revolution in Iran.
After the revolution. So there are all kinds of blanket assumptions that are made about, spies, communists, military people, all kinds of that. So, but I think it is interesting that Sarpong would not get in today.
Steve, can I jump in?
Yeah, sure, Huda, go ahead.
I just wanted to make a comment. I'm not a security expert by any means, but I think the language and the rhetoric that our current federal government has been using, it's all divisive language, primarily pinning people against each other, us versus them. We also have the Minister of Immigration on record saying that they will focus on non-Muslim refugees. And probably there is more placement on security when it comes to Syrian and Iraqi refugees, because they are primarily made of Muslims. And I think they've already said that they will be focusing on, initially they said they would be focusing on minorities, which is absolutely acceptable. But I think much of this goes back to this ongoing language of the Harper government of us versus them, categorizing people in such a despicable blanket statements that would include people like myself and others who don't fit his definition of all-stock Canadians. And I think it's not without say that this policy is basically geared towards the Conservative government's base to get them reelected.
Okay, let me do a couple of follow-ups here in the studio on this. I don't recall the number now. Do you recall how many Southeast Asian, quote-unquote, boat people Canada took in the late 1970s? How many thousands?
I don't remember exactly, maybe 150,000, something
60,000.
like
60,000?
60,000.
Okay.
They started off with wanting to bring 5,000.
And it turned into 60.
It turned into 60 because the people of Canada led.
They demanded
and that
it.
is a
So here's the question, though. Do we know how many of that 60,000 turned out to be genuine security problems? I can't recall hearing a single story, but were there any?
Not that I heard of. No. You know, this is a very interesting issue. I have always taken the view in my research that people become radical when they are marginalized, when they are pushed aside, and my observation also tells me that when people come to Canada, when they enjoy safety and security, they adapt. They
embrace.
They embrace the Canadian cultural values and tolerance and moderation and things like that.
Well,
so it's the condition that make people radical.
Sure.
And if we keep the door open and welcoming others, I can tell you this. I've heard story about former Khmer Rouge elements who came to North America or the West, but when they came here, what they want is, a new life.
They left all that behind.
They're not that radical.
Ratna suggested if you came in today, you wouldn't make it. Robbie, this is not an academic exercise for you. When you did come here, you first were turned down, right?
Yes, I was.
Tell us that story.
I came with my family as a refugee.
How old were you at the time?
I was 20.
Okay.
And I started very early. I had kids, and basically after a long time of waiting, years of waiting, and building a career here in Canada, we were turned down.
Turned down for what?
because Hungary looks like a safe country and you don't have anything to fear. And interestingly, you know, it's been 16 years and things are only getting worse
In
there.
Hungary.
Yes. So it's very interesting how, you know, it was very scary for me to be turned down. And thankfully, I'm a musician and stayed here on humanitarian grounds.
So did they eventually change the no to a yes?
Yes,
How did that happen?
only because of music and the help of a lot of great Canadians who are in music business and fans and people who supported me, and an amazing lawyer. And so basically, you know, if I didn't have music, it would have been much harder. And I feel very bad about the people who didn't play music, but they came for the same reason, and a lot of them had to go back.
How old were you when you started taking jazz piano lessons?
Well, I'm mostly self-taught, so
When did you
pretty
start?
much, I grew up listening to music, and I started at age 7.
Age 7. In hindsight, it's a darn good thing you started playing the piano at 7, or you might not be here today. eh?
Exactly.
Isn't that interesting? Let's do another quote from the book here. Sheldon, if we can, I'm at the bottom of page 3 here. In 1986, the people of Canada were awarded the Nansen Medal by the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees. Quote, in recognition of their essential and constant contribution to the cause of refugees. It is the only occasion when the Nansen Refugee Award was given to an entire people. Yay, Canada. Ratna, any sarcasm in that quote there, do you think?
Yeah, there is sarcasm.
How come?
Because since that time, there has been a decline. And lest we forget, we have been picky about where to be generous and where not to be generous.
Where are we generous, where are we not?
The Ismailis, when in 1975, when Idi Amin expelled the Ismailis or the Asians from Uganda, Prime Minister Trudeau and the Aga Khan worked together to bring 7,000. And that was an incredible outpouring of support. The Hungarians, again, after initially dragging our feet, our Minister of Immigration set up shop in Vienna himself. Went there, set up shop, and started to take applications with his colleagues. Chileans, less so.
How come?
Fear of communism, I would suggest, and a certain alliance and allegiance with the United States on that matter. The Syrians, let's just take a look today. One would imagine that we've just woken up to the Syrian crisis, but in truth, Syrians have been refugees for 4 years. And only now have we woken up to the crisis and are opening our hearts and minds, although in no comparison to the depth and scale of what we did in the 1980s within the Chinese.
So if they had to do it again, we wouldn't get the Nansen Medal today.
For today, I will say the people of Germany will get the Nansen Medal, not the people of Canada. And that's a very interesting reversal, I would say.
Hold on, let me go back to you overseas. Recently, the Canadian government has taken the stance that resettlement from overseas is the only legitimate refugee process. Now, you're somebody who got refugee status once you arrived, so I'd like your view on what you think of that change.
I think many people like myself and my family and hundreds of thousands of people who've come inland to make refugee claims would be turned down, and that would be a travesty and would have huge life implications for those refugees. It is not becoming of Canada to do such actions, to refuse people who are fleeing from persecution, from war, from all the other devastations that we have across the world, to say the only way you can come into Canada is to be brought by the government from a refugee camp. What kind of Canada are we promoting if we're not compassionate enough to say, when you come to our doors, we will receive you with compassion, with care. We will not re-traumatize you, because I have seen people go through the system, the refugee hearing system, and the sheer fear and the devastation that it has on people is unimaginable.
Okay, let
Like
me
I said, at the
contrast
time
that
when
then. Let me contrast that, if I can, with your experience. Sarpong, you were in a refugee camp overseas when you were accepted. Is that you're not going to like this term, but is that a more legitimate refugee acceptance process than, say, people who arrive on these shores and claim asylum status when they're here?
I don't think my case was more legitimate, because everything, is, for me, is based on the fact that refugees fleeing for fear of persecution. And if anybody has that problem, it's legitimate. In my case, I would say also legitimate. In her case, I would also say legitimate. The only difference is that I would say in my case, it's more legal, in a sense that I was, accepted by the Canadian government and got an interview and went through the legal process.
Understood.
So I was basically, my family was basically sponsored by the Canadian government. And so that does not mean that other refugees, the reason that they want to come to Canada or flee to Canada are not legitimate.
Okay, let me circle back, Ratna, to something that Hodan mentioned earlier, which is this notion of bogus refugee claimants. Okay, is that a legitimate risk for Canada, that there are bogus refugee claimants amidst all of those who want to come here?
I think when you have a large pool of people, there's always going to be some risk. But I think the heart of the question is Canada, the Canadian government's official policy that real refugees live in real camps. That does not accept the reality of the refugee experience. As we know, they are escaping camps from Syria, putting their children into boats. There's a certain desperation in this. It sort of has it's grounded in this romantic notion that people will stay put. And we know that there are refugee camps in parts of Africa where people have been living for 25 years.
So we need to be more broad-minded about this in your view.
We need to move with the times.
Okay, Robbie, I want to go to you on this because obviously there's lots of Roma who come from Hungary, Romania, whom the rest of the world considers to be bogus refugees. How do you react when you hear that?
Yes, I think I heard that many times as well, and I'm glad that I have a chance to talk
Speak to
about that. Yes, I think that a lot of people in Canada are not aware that when you come here from Hungary or other parts of Eastern Europe, in order to come here, you have to sell everything you ever had, including your apartment or house, or because of the price of the tickets in comparison to the money back home. So already that when people would say that they come here to take advantage of the welfare system, for example, well, first you have to sell everything you ever had, and if you get turned down, you're going back
to nothing.
To nothing, basically. Many people had to do that, unfortunately. So I think that's very important. But it is important to understand that, to take a close look at the cases, to filter out the bogus refugees.
Well, let me take a closer look at yours. Was it an option for you and your family to get into some kind of legitimate refugee camp so that you could be processed there and then come over?
No.
Why not?
Absolutely not. We had no knowledge of anything like that. The only way we knew to leave Hungary is basically to get a ticket and go. And I think it's important to understand that, and understand that there's a lot of sacrifice, and when people come here like that, they're not after trying to take advantage of a country which gives them a new start. And also, I think at the same time, it's important to look at some cases individually, because I also know that some people come from Hungary or other parts of Europe who are not Roma, and there are some cases that probably who are trying to take advantage of Canada, and they really don't have anything to fear of. But you have to know that when people come here as a refugee, they want to make this place better, and they want to work hard, and they want to pay back.
Ratna, you mentioned earlier that you thought if Sorpong had to do it again today, he wouldn't be accepted. So let me ask you the same thing about Robi. If today a jazz pianist from Hungary tried to come to Canada and claim refugee status, what do you think the answer would be?
Well, first of all, Hungary is, as Hodan mentioned, a designated safe country, which means
so that's problematic already.
That's problematic, and he would be given very little time, I think 35 days or something like that, to prepare his claim, to find legal representation, and to make and to present himself to the IRB. But IRB, the Immigration and Refugee Board. But the interesting thing about claims from Roma people in Canada is that their acceptance rates has gone up. And I looked at this and I couldn't really understand it. And then I figured it out. There are a couple of factors at play. First of all, I think people in Canada and the decision makers realize that Hungary and Europe are not safe for Roma because of the publicity around them. Mm-hmm. Secondly, the people making the decisions are no longer political appointees. They are civil servants.
So is that good or bad?
I think it's good in this case. There's a consistency. And thirdly, avenues for appeals have opened up, and the Roma seem to be getting better legal representation. So strangely enough, if Robbie was able to make it again to Canada, sell his belongings, pack up his trombone, and come here, strangely enough, he doesn't have a trombone. I'm sorry, I'm not.
It's a good one.
He would actually have a way better chance than Sorpong, my assessment.
Today?
Today.
Huh. You want to try it again?
No, I'm fine, thank you. But I'm hoping that people who come here, they'll be treated fair.
I should add, it's a very little-known factoid here, is that the government of Canada, once it designated Hungary as a safe country, it actually took out advertisements for a few months, posting hoardings in Hungary telling Roma people not to come to Canada.
The government of Canada did
The government of Canada, until groups like Amnesty International and Human Rights Watch shut that down.
Called them on it.
Yep.
Hodan, you wanted to add?
Yeah, I just wanted to add a comment about this, the definition of bogus and illegal and all the other definitions that the government uses to delegitimize and dehumanize people who've come seeking refuge in Canada. I think that as a healthcare provider, as a nurse practitioner who's seen numerous refugee claimants and lots of, in particular, Roma refugees, I can tell you some of the physical shows of trauma and torture and beatings and the psychological torment they have gone through is beyond argument. So I always look back to say, who's defining these terms and who's coming up with these words in terms of what encounters have you had with people who faced real discrimination, real torture, beatings, just basically looking a certain way in the environment that you live in. So again, it really begs the question, before we can label people as such, do your due diligence and see where your policy is going. Because I think some of these policies are fairly discriminatory towards certain groups and certain populations.
Okay, let me finish up on this, and Ratna, I want to go back to you on this. I can see some people watching this program right now saying, oh, those bleeding hearts from TVO and this Ratna Omidvar, she's written a book with 30 of the most wonderful profiles of the most wonderful people. All of these examples turned out splendidly well. They came from awful circumstances and they've made great lives for themselves in Canada. But these are anecdotes, it's not data. If you took a broader look at the thing, it wouldn't nearly be as rosy a scenario as she's painting it to be. Okay, you know that view's out there? Speak to it if you would.
Well, I'd be the first to say that anecdotes are not evidence. But anecdotes serve to give context and particularity to the abstract. And they release our imagination in different ways. I'm not suggesting that 30 stories, the ones that we have chosen, are the pattern for every refugee. But I do know this, and again, the evidence bears me out. Over time, over time, refugees and their children will succeed in incredible ways and will contribute to this country in different ways. I will also admit that, as I said, many refugees have broken lives. I have had the privilege of working with very young refugees who came from Rwanda and Burundi and Congo. And I know their life story, and I am in complete awe of them, that they can actually function, that they can get up in the morning and go to school and write essays, and without giving into the despair that I know is part of their history, part of their personal history.
Well, I want to thank all of you for not only your contributions to our program, but to Canada as well. Can we thank Hodan Ali, who came here from Somalia in 1989. She's now in Hamilton at the Refuge Hamilton Center for Newcomer Health at St. Joseph's Hospital. We've had her on Skype in Bahrain. Ratna Omidvar, co-author of this new book, Flight and Freedom. Sorpong Pyo, who originally came from Cambodia in 1982. He's now the chair of the Department of Politics and Public Administration at Ryerson University. And Robi Botos, originally from Hungary, came here in 1998. He's got the jazz hands going. He's got a great jazz pianist. Thanks so much, everybody. Great to have you on TVO tonight.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Help TVO create a better world through the power of learning. Visit supporttvo.org and make a tax-deductible donation today.